They shone brighter than the lights of the studio lots. Their faces filled the silver screens of every neighborhood theater from coast to coast. We knew their names by heart: Marilyn, Audrey, Clark, Elizabeth, James, Humphrey, Grace, Steve, Jack. We memorized their lines, copied their styles, and dreamed their lives. But what we saw was carefully lit, carefully scripted, carefully controlled. Behind the marquees and the publicity stills existed another world, quieter, messier, more human. A world of bare feet on cold kitchen floors, of cigarettes smoked in silence at 3 in the morning, of laughter that never made the fan magazines, of loneliness that no amount of applause could fill. This is the story of those rare private moments. From the wartime 40s through the turbulent 80s, these are the glimpses of Hollywood's greatest stars when the cameras were off, the makeup was wiped away, and the legend was left outside the door. The 1940s began with war and ended with an uneasy peace. Hollywood was both escape and propaganda machine. Stars sold war bonds by day and returned home to blackout curtains and ration books by night. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, carried a private grief that few outside his closest circle ever saw. After the plane crash that killed his wife, Carol Lombard, in 1942, Gable enlisted in the Army Air Forces. When he returned, the swagger remained for the public, but at home in Encino, the house felt too large. Friends remembered him sitting for long stretches on the porch, staring at the empty driveway, a glass of whiskey barely touched. He would later say the war had given him purpose when nothing else could. In rare candid photographs from the mid-40s, he appears thinner, older, the famous mustache less perfectly trimmed. One snapshot shows him in a simple white t-shirt, leaning against a fence on his ranch, eyes distant. No studio lighting, no leading lady smile, just a man who had lost the only person who ever truly knew him. Humphrey Bogart's private world was smaller and sharper. At home with Lauren Bacall after their marriage in 1945, Bogart preferred quiet evenings, chess, and sailing. Rare photographs from their early years together show him in a battered sailing cap, cigarette dangling, laughing at something Bacall has just said. The tough guy image dissolved into something almost boyish. He hated parties that lasted past midnight. He hated the constant demand to perform. In one seldom-seen series of images taken at their home, Bogart sits on the floor with their dogs, sleeves rolled up, completely unguarded. The man who made "Here's Looking at You, Kid" immortal was, in private, a man who preferred looking at his wife across a quiet room. Judy Garland's private moments in the 40s were often painful. The studio system worked her relentlessly. Between takes and public appearances, she sometimes retreated to dressing rooms where the only company was a glass of water and a trembling hand. Yet there were softer moments too. Rare images of her holding her daughter Liza, face soft with a tenderness the cameras rarely captured. In one photograph from the late 40s, she sits on a couch in a simple house dress, no makeup, singing softly to the child in her arms. The voice that could fill the Hollywood Bowl was, in that private second, only a lullaby. The 50s were the height of the studio system's power and the beginning of its cracks. Stars were still manufactured, but some began to push back against the machine. Marilyn Monroe's private life has been picked apart for decades, yet certain moments remain strangely pure. Early photographs by André de Diens from the mid-40s and late 40s show a young Norma Jean on beaches and in the woods, playful, introspective, far from the platinum bombshell the world would later demand. In 1946, she stands on Zuma Beach in a simple swimsuit, hair natural, expression thoughtful. Later, in New York in the 50s, candid shots taken by friends and the group known as the Monroe Six capture her walking city streets in a trench coat, no hair and makeup team in sight, sometimes laughing, sometimes looking tired. The 7-Year Itch shows her between takes, quiet, almost shy, the famous white dress moment still hours away. In private, she read voraciously, collected books, and struggled with insomnia. Friends remembered her sitting up late, barefoot, writing notes in the margins of poetry volumes. The woman the world saw as pure fantasy was, in those hours, simply trying to understand herself. Audrey Hepburn's private world was deliberately protected. After the success of Roman Holiday, she retreated whenever possible to quieter spaces. In Switzerland, she found the peace she needed. Rare family photographs show her in the gardens of La Paisible, the country estate she bought near Tolo-Chanaz. She wears simple clothes, sweaters, trousers, sometimes an old shirt of her husband's. She cooks with vegetables from her own garden. She plays with her son Sean on the grass. In one series of images from the late 50s and early 60s, she sits on a low wall, barefoot, laughing as the child runs toward her. The elegant Givenchy gowns are nowhere in sight. The role of mother and gardener. She once said the greatest performance of her life was simply being present for her children. Elizabeth Taylor's private moments in the 50s were often domestic and surprisingly ordinary. Photographs from her Bel Air home show her washing her dog, feeding pets while dressed in evening clothes, or simply sitting at a dressing table with her children nearby. In one well-known but still intimate image, she wears a deep red gown and diamond choker while carefully feeding her poodle from a spoon. The contrast is almost comic, yet it reveals something essential. The glamorous star was also a young woman trying to build a home amid constant public scrutiny. Later images from the late 50s capture her with Mike Todd, laughing in unguarded moments before his death. The private Elizabeth could be playful, maternal, and fiercely protective of the small circle she trusted. James Dean's private life was short and intense. Off camera, he was restless, often lonely. Rare photographs show him in jeans and a simple jacket, leaning against a motorcycle, or sitting alone in a diner. Friends remembered him sketching, reading, or driving for hours with no destination. In one series of candid images, he appears almost boyish, smiling at something just out of frame. Unforgettable was, in private, often turned inward. He sought authenticity in a town that specialized in surfaces. Those who knew him said the real James Dean was quieter than the myth, more uncertain, more hungry for connection than the brooding image suggested. The 60s brought cultural upheaval, and Hollywood's private lives reflected the changing times. Steve McQueen cultivated a tough, independent image, but private photographs reveal a man who loved speed, solitude, and simple pleasures. Rare images show him working on cars in his garage, grease on his hands, or riding motorcycles through the California hills. At home, he could be surprisingly gentle with his children. One series of photographs captures him on the floor playing with his son, the famous Cool completely absent. The king of cool, in private, was a man who found peace in mechanical things and open roads. Paul Newman's private life was famously grounded. Married to Joanne Woodward for decades, he preferred Connecticut over Hollywood whenever possible. Rare photographs show him cooking, racing cars for pure enjoyment, or simply sitting on a porch with a beer. The piercing blue eyes that filled movie screens looked softer in private. Friends described a man who was competitive yet loyal, famous yet deliberately ordinary in his habits. He once said the best times were the ones no camera recorded. The Rat Pack's private moments were often more complicated than the public revelry suggested. Frank Sinatra's home life swung between exuberant parties and deep solitude. Rare images from the early 60s show him at home in Palm Springs, sometimes surrounded by friends, sometimes alone at a piano late at night. Dean Martin, behind the easygoing image, was a private man who preferred family time and early nights. Photographs of him with his children reveal a warmth the nightclub persona rarely allowed. By the 70s, the studio system had largely collapsed. Stars had more freedom and, often, more isolation. Jack Nicholson's private world in the 70s was legendary in certain circles, yet carefully guarded. Rare photographs from the period show him at home in Mulholland Drive, often barefoot, reading, or talking with friends late into the night. The wild public image coexisted with a more reflective private self. He collected art, valued loyalty, and maintained a small circle. Candid images from that era capture him laughing with genuine ease, the intensity of his screen roles temporarily set aside. Robert Redford retreated whenever possible to Utah. Private photographs show him in simple work clothes, building, riding horses, or simply standing in open landscape. The golden boy image of the late 60s and early 70s softened into something quieter. He valued privacy fiercely and built a life far from the constant demands of fame. Jane Fonda's private evolution in the 70s was dramatic. From the glamorous early years to her political activism, rare photographs capture her in both worlds, at home with her children and in more serious, unposed moments of conviction. The private Jane of that decade was searching, restless, determined to define herself beyond the roles the industry offered. The 80s brought a new kind of fame, louder, more mediated, yet still capable of private grace. Audrey Hepburn continued her private life in Switzerland, increasingly focused on humanitarian work. Family photographs from the 80s show her with her sons, still preferring simple clothes and quiet days. The elegance never left her, but it was an elegance of presence rather than costume. Even as the industry changed, certain private habits endured. Stars still sought the same things ordinary people seek: a quiet room, a trusted companion, a moment without performance. What these rare private moments reveal is not the destruction of myth, but its completion. The legends were real people who laughed, mourned, cooked breakfast, played with children, sat alone with their thoughts, and sometimes failed to live up to the images the world demanded. From the 40s through the 80s, Hollywood's greatest stars carried both extraordinary talent and ordinary humanity. The photographs and memories that survive from those private hours are gifts. They remind us that behind every carefully lit close-up was a person who, like the rest of us, needed rest, love, and the freedom to simply be. The cameras eventually stopped rolling, the parties ended, the lights dimmed, and in those quieter spaces, the real stories continued. Stories of resilience, tenderness, loneliness, and grace. We may never see them exactly as their closest friends and family saw them, but in these rare glimpses, a barefoot star in a garden, a grieving husband on a porch, a young mother singing to her child, a restless actor sketching alone, we come closer than the studio ever intended. And in that closeness, the legends become somehow more luminous, not less. Because the most enduring performances were never the ones captured on film, they were the ones lived, quietly, when no one was watching.